What's up and hello people of YouTube and welcome to my YouTube show. So today in this video I am going to talk about the negative life in the former Soviet Union. So that's the topic of this video today. And so in the next video I'm going to plan to make the part 2 of life after the Soviet era. A part 2 of life after the Soviet era. So now I'm going to talk about the negative life in Soviet Union. So some of the negative things in Soviet Union or negative life in Soviet Union was that sometimes in the between the winter there would be no tomatoes. There would be no tomatoes in the fall and the winter. There would be no tomatoes whatsoever. But like whenever it was the summer, there would always be tomatoes in the summer. And like in the beginning of the summer, like in May, there would always be tomatoes at the beginning of when the month of May began during that time. And then by October all the tomatoes would disappear. It would stop growing during that time. There would be no tomatoes in October whatsoever. After that month, after the October began during that period. And so there would be no tomatoes whatsoever after during in October. And some of the negative things in Soviet Union, not positive things, bad things in Soviet Union, was at that time there was a lot of laws. So like if you spoke something bad about like government officials or like the leader of the Soviet Union, like for example uh, Brezhnev or the other Soviet leaders, you could get into trouble with authorities or like with this police force, militsaya, and you could get in trouble with them and they could put you in prison. So you really, really had to keep your mouth, you really, really had to watch what you say from your mouth in that country. So you cannot just go out into the public because there may be some police officers and or the militsaya in Soviet Union. They could actually arrest you and throw you into the jail. So you really, really had to think before you say something. Think before you say something about the leaders of the Soviet Union. So, and you could also get arrested. And then also, same thing with work. If you didn't go to work without any good reason, you could also get arrested and you could be thrown into jail for over 3 years, I believe. Yeah, 3 years. You could be thrown up to 3 years. That was a law in the 1980s in the Soviet Union, in the early 80s. And then you could, if you were sick or something, if you didn't give like a good reason, like a valid reason, like for example if you were sick or you were handicapped or whatever, or taking care of a baby, you could get arrested. You could get arrested for not showing up to work or go to college or whatever. So those were one of the laws in the former USSR and during that time. So people really, really had to come to work so they could earn the money they were getting during that time while they were living in Soviet Union, or which is now present day Russia. And so the life in that country was just very life in that country was not civilized, and it was not very well organized during that period, because in that country there was a lot of corrupt guys in the government, like this Politburo, who were this top government officials, and they were top government officials, and the government of Soviet Union promised the people of the country after 20 years. I think this was in 1961 when Khrushchev promised the Soviet people to give the Soviet people more to give them better houses, or no, give them a better apartment buildings. That's what Khrushchev said in 20 years. the Soviet people will have better apartment buildings that would be like bigger and taller, and that's what Khrushchev or first secretary of Communist Party Khrushchev promised the Soviet people during that time. In 20 years, you will have nice, new, brand new apartment buildings in that country. But then he basically lied. And then 2 decades later, there was no apartment buildings, new apartment buildings. Everything was the same still. Nothing changed during that time, after the time of Khrushchev. So that did nothing changed in that country during its during its 69 years of history. During its 69 years of history, from 1922 all the way to 1991, when the Soviet Union dissolved during that period. So it was the education system in Soviet Union was in the schools, and it was in colleges. So it was in schools. So schools mostly taught math and math, physics, and this other stuff, and history of the Communist Party of Soviet Union. So that's what basically they taught in most schools throughout the nation, throughout this USSR. That's what the schools in the USSR taught the students in the schools during that period. And so there was no commercial breaks in that country when Soviet Union was around during that period. There was no TV. There were TVs during that period, but there was no commercial breaks whatsoever. There was no commercials during that period. And then there was Soviet government promised the people there would be more. We will give you more food and bread. And so that they basically lied to the people, deceiving the Soviet citizens. They lied, basically, Soviet government, and Soviet people did not get any bread, any food, or anything. That was a lie. They're basically putting all this crap in the Soviet people's heads and trying to make them believe we will give you food, we'll give you this, we'll give you bread. They basically lied, and people in the Soviet Union were very upset at the government, at Soviet government, and Soviet citizens were very angry at the government. And it's also very crazy because in the country, like for example in the United States, you don't know who's going to be the new leader after Brezhnev or Andropov died. You didn't know who was going to be the new leader, because there was no, after, like, for example, when Comrade Brezhnev died in 1982, the TV was turned off for 3 days. People in the country did not watch TV for 3 days during that period, and the TV was like off limits for the people of the country. And so it took 3 days. It took 3 days for them to make a new decision, who's going to be the new leader of the Soviet Union following the Brezhnev's death. And so by November 12th, 1982, I believe, 1982, the members of the Politburo decided that Yuri Andropov was going to be the new leader of the Soviet Union, or present day Russia. And like in the United States, in the United States, you vote for the president you want. But in Soviet Union, you didn't have that right to vote for the leader, because there was no political freedom in Soviet Union. It was all government. So the Politburo, these top government officials in Soviet Union, or the central committee, would pick the new leader, who's basically gonna lead the nation or the Soviet Union after the death of a leader. So that's basically what the government in the Soviet Union was during that time. So also the construction sites were also owned by this owned by the government of Soviet Union. So it was all under government control. The construction system in Soviet Union was all under government control. So it was under the property of the Soviet Union during that period. And so during the during and then also, yeah, there was also some bad things in Soviet Union, and there was also some good times in Soviet Union. For example, like when USSR began to come down, began to come down when Soviet Union began to came down in 19 and then in the late 1980s when the Gorbachev came power. So there were also some positive things during the Gorbachev rule, and even there were negative things before Gorbachev during that time. And so, and then also positive things were like when the positive things in Soviet Union were basically like when Gorbachev told the Soviet people about what Khrushchev did, and there was these newspapers during the Gorbachev time, which was like basically events that the Soviet people didn't know for maybe 40 decades. That when Stalin was in power and when Khrushchev was in power. And a lot of people were very interested in reading that, and they learned a lot about what happened during the Khrushchev time and during the Stalin time when they were both in power. And so they Soviet people began to realize Soviet people began to realize that it was Soviet people began to realize that they were not really good guys, and they were very bad. So, yep, so I hope you enjoy this video. So please drop a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.